BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, Nedheads. Hello, Black Box Battalion. Today is Monday, another Zodiac Monday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? On Mondays, I talk to you guys about the Zodiac Killer, an unidentified serial killer who operated in California in 1968 and 69. Whatever happened before or after that is still part of the mystery. And you guys know the drill. You can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment down below if you have something to say about the Zodiac Killer. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. And I am your host, Box Ned. I would like to pick up where I left off last week, because on the Zodiac Killer news report, I was responding to the podcast that was done on Zodiac Speaking, hosted by Mike Morford, and they were discussing the Zodiac Killer suspect, McDuff. And McDuff is somebody whom has generated a lot of interest and a lot of discussions. Morph has convinced a lot of people in the audiences, plural, that McDuff was the Zodiac Killer. Of course, his name was William MacDuff Andrew. And the podcast is about 2.5 hours long. So I told you guys that last week I responded to the first hour. This will be mostly the second, and there will be a very brief follow-up next week where I cover the material from the final 30 minutes, final 40 minutes of Zodiac Speaking, discussing the Zodiac Killer suspect, William MacDuff Andrew, and you can find it under the name Big Mac Update. 1 point. Mike Morford wanted to address the elephant in the room, if you will, and I think that that metaphor is absolutely appropriate, because he said that there are two major challenges that people propose to the Zodiac suspect McDuff, and they say that they don't think that McDuff was the Zodiac Killer because, number one, he had a shoe size that was too small, McDuff wore an 8 or an 8.5, and the Zodiac Killer's footprints that were collected from Lake Berryessa were estimated to have been a 10.5, or matched to a 10.5. That's one. And the second one that I actually want to talk about now is that McDuff had enormous ears. If you go through the comments section on various videos, you might even find something to the effect of, McDuff had ears like satellite dishes. That comes up from time to time, even in other cases, like the D.B. Cooper case, talking about suspects with big ears. You will find that simile. He had ears like satellite dishes. And Morph didn't want to address this on his podcast by stating that if you look at the composite sketch of the Zodiac Killer after the Stein murder, the most famous one that has the glasses and the crew cut, you will see that there are not ears that protrude outward like William MacDuff Andrews did. But Morph's response was, the Robbins kids were looking at the Zodiac from 50 feet away at night through a window, and no matter how good their vision was, they perhaps were not able to capture the image of his ears correctly. And we have to bear in mind that the two witnesses that provided the info for the composite sketch were Lindsay and Rebecca Robbins. Even though the Zodiac was also witnessed that night by Officer Donald Falk, he did not contribute to the composite sketch, nor did Officer Eric Zelms. So we have the Robbins kids looking at the Zodiac at night, and Lindsay Robbins did make a follow-up statement in his interview with Jim Dean when he stated that he believed that the composite sketches were very accurate. But the thing that Morph wants to challenge him on is, no matter how good his vision was, he shouldn't have been able to see the size of somebody's ears from 50 feet away at night. What does this mean? This is reinforcing a point that we've talked about a lot here on Zodiac Monday, that countless Zodiac researchers and sleuths and commentators have brought up, and that is that the Zodiac Killer composite sketches after the Stein murder are most likely unreliable. And that's a sad statement to say, because I wish I could just tell you that this is what I think the Zodiac Killer looked like to a T. But maybe they're just not that helpful. And in fact, they could just be enormous distractions. And I know you've perhaps heard that on some other channels, but this is something that Morph was discussing, because he has a suspect that has some similarities to that sketch, but also a lot of differences. The next thing is, during Morph's most recent podcast, he brought up several coincidences that have ignited a lot of discussions among people. And strangely, McDuff had a connection to the state of South Dakota. During McDuff's time in the 1960s, it appears that he had some type of trouble with his academics, and one school that he wanted to go to was in South Dakota. And the state of South Dakota, as well as even North Dakota, come up a lot in the true crime world in regards to California and crime in the 60s and 70s, because there was a nurse who worked at Letterman General Hospital, near where the Zodiac's final victim, Paul Stine, was murdered, and her name was Donna Lass. And Donna Lass left Letterman General Hospital to go start a job in the summer of 1970 in the South Lake Tahoe region. She worked in State Line, Nevada, and she lived in South Lake Tahoe, California. Donna Lass goes on to become a possible victim of the Zodiac Killer, and Donna Lass was from Beresford, South Dakota. So McDuff has a South Dakota connection, Donna Lass has a South Dakota connection, and it's just strange how many of these Zodiac Killer suspects get connected to the Dakotas, and how many times this type of California true crime gets connected to the Dakotas, because of course Richard Gaikowski, one of the more famous Zodiac Killer suspects, was from Watertown, South Dakota. That was his place of origin. And if we're going to include North Dakota, I mean, people have tried to connect the Zodiac Killer to crimes there, such as Sphere the Cube accusing the Zodiac of the 1972 murder of Laura Jean Dugan in North Dakota. And also, I mean, James Freeman, who wrote the Crooked River Zodiac series, has a suspect that he believes was operating on a radian that was going from Minot, North Dakota, all the way to the Bay Area. So the Dakotas come up a lot in these discussions. Even the murder of Arliss Perry from 1974, while I absolutely do not think that was a Zodiac crime, she was from the Dakotas as well. So, I mean, McDuff has a South Dakota connection, and somebody brought this to my attention in the comments section last week saying, Ned, you should tell Morph about the connection between Donna Lass and Letterman General Hospital, because it seems like Mike Morford is unaware that Donna Lass worked there. And, I mean, I'm pretty sure Morph did know that, and he was aware of that. It's just, I mean, I do think that that's quite shocking, that out of all the 50 states, McDuff would have a South Dakota connection, as well as Donna Lass, because this is how people try to frame the Zodiac narrative. The Zodiac targeted Donna Lass. Even if your suspect is not McDuff, even if your suspect is not Richard Gaikowski or Lawrence Kane or any of the famous Zodiac suspects. But this is just purely in theory. And it would go something like this. The Zodiac was in San Francisco, of course, and Donna Lass was in San Francisco at Letterman General Hospital, and he developed some type of obsession with her, and he knew that she had moved to South Lake Tahoe, California in the summer of 1970, and he decided to stalk a specific victim. No more shooting couples that are parked in cars at lovers' lanes. He wanted to attack a very specific victim, and then he was able to do so on September 6th of 1970, abducting and murdering Donna Lass. Now, maybe that's what happened, or maybe just Donna Lass has some extremely horrible luck. No matter what, rest in peace to her. But to come back to McDuff for a second, I was just talking about McDuff and his ears. That's one piece of physicality. But there were other observations that have been made about McDuff, and they come to us from his widow, Karen, and she has stated all of this stuff publicly about how she does not think that her late husband was a serial killer, that she does not believe that he was the Zodiac Killer. And this is something that I think needs to be reinforced, because Mike Morford is talking about how he doesn't believe that she would have known everything about him in the 1960s, because they didn't start their acquaintanceship and dating and courtship until the 1970s. It actually seems like they didn't know each other for an extremely long amount of time before they were married in 1974. But the Zodiac crimes occurred in the 1960s. So everything that she is trying to think about in regards to McDuff is in retrospect, because the Zodiac operated in 68 and 69, maybe committed crimes in 1970, like the previously mentioned murder of Donna Lass. But again, she's also backtracking. I can give more of credit there, about 55%. The other 45% would be even though all of that is true, I still think that his wife would have known his shoe size. She's the one who publicly stated that he wore a size 8 shoe, and then Morph said on the podcast it was 8.5. I remembered size 8 from a previous episode, but she's the one who offered that information. Only stating the facts here. She says size 8, the reports say 10.5. There is somewhat of a difference, and I don't think that that's a difference that should be dismissed. Some other background pieces of information that were discussed about McDuff in the podcast were that McDuff's occupational history is somewhat questionable. In the late 1960s and perhaps early 70s, it is believed that he was working at Ace Hardware, the hardware store, and then he starts a job with the state of California where he's listed as a laborer. Now, some people have just assumed that from 1971 and for X amount of years, he was working as a prison guard. Even on last week's Zodiac Monday, I was talking about how he was expected to have been a prison guard for a very long time, working in the tower, but we don't necessarily know if that's what he did at first. He could have been doing something else with the state of California. I think that Morph is really paying close attention to that, and I give Mike Morford credit for, again, being honest and just saying we don't necessarily know that McDuff was a prison guard for the entirety of that time. But that just raises a lot of questions about what McDuff was doing. So, as you can see, my biggest takeaway is the South Dakota connection. That leaves room for an enormous amount of explorations, trying to find out if there is this type of connection going on with McDuff, because he also has the Deer Lodge connection, which I was talking about last week, and that is that he had a family member who was actually in or around Deer Lodge, Montana, and the Zodiac talked about Deer Lodge, Montana, during the Lake Berryessa stabbing, and the South Dakota thing. All of the stuff is starting to come together with McDuff, but that being said, these could all just be coincidences. What do you think about the Zodiac Killer suspect McDuff? You can put your responses in the comments section down below, and I would love to read them. And now for the next segment on Zodiac Monday, I would like to dive into Michael Butterfield's Zodiac Killer book, The Zodiac Killer, the story of America's most elusive murderer. Now, I've had Michael Butterfield as a guest on the program, and we had the opportunity to talk about his book and all things Zodiac, but it's finally time for me to just sit down and explore this. And that's what I did over the weekend, because I had him as a guest on the program for 2 weeks, and then I also had C.G. Karras last week on the program talking about his book, The Zodiac Murderers in History, Ciphers, and Crimes. But I really just wanted to go through Michael Butterfield's book and just see what we would find. So I would like to begin with the Lake Herman Road Murders. And I would actually like to jump into an early section of the book right here. And I'm going to read a quotation. David and Betty Lou told Mr. and Mrs. Jensen that they were going to a festival at Hogan High. David's sister Debbie later recalled him saying that they were going out to Lake Herman Road to hang out with some other kids. And this festival is mostly thought to be the Christmas concert, and it appears now in retrospect that that was totally a made-up story that they were sharing just to go out on their own and do what they wanted. So they told their parents they were going to a Christmas concert, but it seems like they were just teenagers who wanted to have some fun. The two teenagers promised to be home by 11 p.m. and climbed into the Rambler to begin their night drive together. They arrived at Betty Lou's friend's house at 8:20, and after a brief visit, the couple left at 9 o'clock. Pay very close attention to this timeline, people, that's going to be laid out, because this is going to share some very, very peculiar things about the activities at Lake Herman Road. Lake Herman Road, of course, the first confirmed murder of the Zodiac Killer, and this is also something that I cannot get over, no matter how many years I've looked into this. The Zodiac's only double homicide, officially. In the confirmed crimes, the Zodiac only successfully committed a double homicide once, and it was his first crime. After a brief visit, the couple left at 9 o'clock. According to some reports, they went to the Christmas concert at Hogan High, which almost certainly was a made-up thing that was just a cover. But around 10 o'clock, they were driving about, and that's not even a quotation. I want to insert that, but it does say 10 o'clock here, because I want to skip over the Christmas concert. At 10:15 p.m. on December 20th of 1968, Helen Axe and her husband were driving through the rolling hills on the outskirts of Benicia along the dark and secluded Lake Herman Road. They saw David's Rambler station wagon parked in a lover's lane spot in front of the gate entrance to the Benicia water pumping station. A bright yellow foreign car was also parked in the area, and Helen said that a man was sitting in the driver's seat, but she could not tell if the man had a female passenger or not. Shortly after 11 p.m., Peggy Ure was with her husband, Homer, while checking pipes and equipment as part of his job with the Frederickson Pipe Company, and they noticed the Rambler parked with the front end pointed east facing a large field to the left of the station. A young girl was in the passenger seat, and the Rambler and sat with her head on the shoulder of the boy in the driver's seat, who reacted by the passing headlights by placing his hands on the steering wheel. The Ures continued along the road and then saw a red truck parked nearby the Marshall Ranch. All right, now, this is something else that is also very important for the timeline, because that is after 11 p.m. And after 10:15, we see that the car is parked on a lover's lane style way. And this is also something that is very odd about Lake Herman Road, because we can see from the crime scene illustrations, I repeat, illustrations that were done after the fact, that David's Rambler, the car that David Faraday would have been driving, is extremely close to the road. So close that the Zodiac could have easily driven up on the right side of the car and exited, and there's an enormous amount of space between the fence and David's Rambler. So it sounds like from that set of writings that David Faraday would have been parked much closer to the fence when he's witnessed at this earlier time, and witnessed at the time that is around 10:15, and then at some point he eased the car up to the spot where they were ultimately attacked by the Zodiac. And I think that would make perfect sense if they went there for intimacy, because as it was just stated here in the book, The Zodiac, the story of America's most elusive murderer, the oncoming traffic could easily see into a car that's parked right on the side of the road. So it sounds like whatever's going on at that point is not anything intimate. It sounds like David and Betty Lou may have been having a conversation, and I wouldn't count her putting her head on his shoulder a form of intimacy. But now the latest time that we have talked about here is shortly after 11 o'clock. This is 11 p.m. on December 20th of 1968. At roughly 11:20 p.m., Vallejo resident James Owens was driving along Lake Herman Road on his way to work that night at the Humble Oil Company. He saw the Rambler parked outside the gated entrance, and another vehicle was parked approximately 10 feet to the right of the station wagon. Owen was unable to describe the other car, and he said that he did not see anyone in or around the two vehicles. He continued along the road and heard what sounded like a gunshot when he was approximately 1/4 of a mile away from the location. Now that is at 11:20 p.m. This person, James Owen, drives by, and he sees a second car in the parking lot. He may have heard a gunshot. So many questionable things are going on with this sighting, and I think that this reveals something much larger about the Zodiac Killer, and that is that the Zodiac, if he were indeed in the exact car that James Owen allegedly saw, just got lucky. The Zodiac wasn't a brilliant criminal mastermind. The Zodiac was not a sophisticated criminal. The Zodiac wasn't some brilliant planner. It's just checking to see if the coast is clear. A car is passed, having a quick glance, then he is committing his crime. And I think that a little bit more time would have gone by than for James Owen to have driven a 1/4 mile, because it doesn't take a car that long to drive a 1/4 mile for the Zodiac to pull the gun and order David and Betty Lou out of the car. So I have a couple doubts about this here. And as I said, the timelines are important, but we are dealing with, approximately 11:20 p.m. But the reason why I said the Zodiac was extremely lucky, somebody drove by, perhaps right before the murders, and he didn't see the Zodiac's car. And he didn't see the Zodiac's car well enough to get a solid description. Let me be clear about that. He did not remember the type of car that he saw, because I just want to throw this out there, and this is a hypothetical, and even if James Owen saw a different vehicle, okay, that's beside the point right now for the purpose of this discussion. How valuable would it have been if a witness drove by and knew the exact type of car the Zodiac had used at Lake Herman Road? How valuable would that be to these discussions? What if this person had seen the person in the car through the window and he was able to match the type of description to the Stein murder and just tell us all of this information? The Zodiac just got lucky. He committed a crime at this turnoff off of a public road, and it's just, he checked to see if the coast was clear, and he expected that he could commit the murder without getting caught. Alright, that's a little bit of crime scene awareness. There's nothing brilliant about that. Even a fool would know that if he commits a crime in front of a witness, then they're gonna be witnesses. That goes without saying. It's just that the Zodiac was lucky that no one saw his car and remembered the details, got a good enough look at his car to trace information back to him. So, I also want to talk about some of the other things that I've been reading in Michael Butterfield's book in regards to the Lake Herman Road murders. And these things relate to the lifestyle choices of David and Betty Lou Jensen. One person who was a very brief suspect in the Lake Herman Road murders was an individual named Richard Burton, and he's mostly referred to as Ricky Burton, and he was a guy that was briefly involved with David and Betty Lou. But there are some things here, though, that are stated in the book, and I just want to get the exact page. And I've got it now. In her junior year at Hogan High School, Betty Lou was an honor student and had developed a talent as an artist. Unlike many other 16-year-old girls, Betty Lou had not dated boys, although she had formed a platonic relationship with a teenager named Ricky. And again, that's Ricky Burton. So, as far as this thing about not dating, it's always been my understanding that Betty Lou did date, but she did not do that publicly. She did not do it in front of her parents. And it's not simply that I'm just remembering something that I read in other books years ago. We're going to see very clearly that she actually stated this in her own journal when she was writing about Ricky. And it openly states Ricky was reportedly upset when Betty Lou ended their relationship to be with David. And a notebook was found in Betty Lou's school locker, which included an entry about Ricky that said, "Do you know a kid named Richard Burton? I was going with him until 2 days before the installation. He still phones me and is threatening me to keep away from Dave. He said if he's ever close enough to Dave, he would punch him in the teeth. I told him to leave me alone, and if he knows what's good for him, to leave her alone if he knows what's good for him." And according to an unconfirmed account, David allegedly confronted Ricky at his high school on Friday, December 20th. There was no physical contact, and David walked away. Okay, so this does not sound like just a platonic interaction that's going on with Ricky. It seems like that he was pursuing her romantically, and she was receptive to this. Now, one thing that is unclear is what actually happened outside of school. It definitely appears that they were classmates and they had interactions that were going on within their own high school. So it seems like Betty Lou had some type of a dating life. It's just her first official date was with David Faraday. And again, no fault of Betty Lou, no fault of David Faraday. I don't think they did anything wrong on the night of December 20th. 1968, and it also doesn't seem like Ricky Burton is actually a suspect that we should strongly consider, because it just seems like the Zodiac happened to find David and Betty Lou because of circumstance, location, and the Zodiac's own agenda that is outside of everything associated with Betty and David's normal life. But I want to turn it over to you guys, and I want to ask you the question: do you think that the Zodiac just got lucky at Lake Herman Road? Or do you think that his sophisticated criminal mind allowed him to get away with it? And moreover, let's turn that into a twofold challenge question. Do you believe that that vehicle that James Owen saw actually was the Zodiac's car at Lake Herman Road? Or do you think that that was just a different, unrelated car? Now, I told you I have some questionable issues about the gunshot. Maybe he was actually able to hear the gunshot from farther away than just a quarter mile. But there's some things that I would question about that. But as far as the timelines go, that does seem like there's a high chance that it was the Zodiac's car. But do you think that was the Zodiac that was witnessed by James Owen sitting in the car, not exiting yet? And I would just love to know your responses. Please put them in the comment section down below. And like I said, I was discussing the book, The Zodiac, the Story of America's Most Elusive Murderer. And when I had Michael Butterfield on the program, we concluded our interview by talking about a different book that was out there called The Most Dangerous Animal of All, that was written by Gary Stewart. And this is a book that talks about Earl Van Best as a Zodiac Killer suspect, and it was turned into a 4-part documentary series, a mini-series if you will, that aired on FX and was later released on Hulu. And Michael Butterfield told me that there was a movie that was supposed to be made about the book The Most Dangerous Animal of All. And even though I read the book, even though I made numerous episodes about that book and Earl Van Best as a Zodiac Killer suspect, I didn't know that they were making it into a drama. Of course, I watched the documentary and responded to it back in 2020. That's been 5 years now. But there is an article that is on Geek Tyrant called New Film About the Zodiac Will Be Developed, and it's called The Most Dangerous Animal of All. And this is actually not from 5 years ago, this is from 7 years ago, but this is what happened with Gary Stewart's possible film about Earl Van Best and him trying to find his father, who may have been the Zodiac Killer. There's a new film about the Zodiac being developed called The Most Dangerous Animal of All. It is based on the New York Times best-selling book of the same name, written by Gary L. Stewart, who claims that his dad, Earl Van Best Jr., was the Zodiac Killer. The rights to the book were acquired by Ross Dinerstein and Campfire Entertainment, and the plan to make a documentary at first was going to be followed up with a feature film. The title of the book comes from the 1932 movie The Most Dangerous Game, which law enforcement for years has said could have inspired the Zodiac Killer. Well, that was not only a movie, it was also the title of a story, but it seems like this is a situation where Gary Stewart would have sold the movie rights, or there's also something called optioning the movie rights, but sometimes studios do this, where they buy the rights to a film even if they never make it, and they just do it so they have the possibility of doing it if they so choose in the future, or if they see that there's a market for it. And as I understand, as a total outsider, a lot of this stuff just has to do with moving money around in the film business. But one thing that I would like to conclude with here, and that is that this is also from the Geek Tyrant article. There have been multiple films made about the Zodiac Killer over the years. My favorite is David Fincher's 2007 film Zodiac, which is one of my all-time favorite movies. I've been fascinated with the Zodiac Killer for a long time, and the fact that he was never caught or identified is a major part of the lore that interests people. There have been many theories over the years on who the Zodiac Killer could have been. Well, it certainly wasn't Earl Van Best, and I was just wondering why I hadn't heard about Gary Stewart making his dramatization of the book, The Most Dangerous Animal of All, and it seems like that studio acquired the rights to the film, but it's been 7 years, so I would expect that they must not be in production for anything, or at the very least they might be holding off, but based on Gary Stewart's credibility, it's unlikely that that film will happen. But in terms of other news related to the Zodiac Killer, there is also a new book that is out, and I don't know if I should say new, it came out about a month ago, maybe almost a month and a half, and it's called How I Cracked the Zodiac's Code by Melissa Brooks. And this is one that I just happened to find because of a recommendation from Amazon.com. I get books about the Zodiac Killer from time to time, you could say, and this was one that was recommended to me, and I hadn't heard of it before, How I Cracked the Zodiac's Code, and I would like to read the description for you. And by the way, I do have to preface this by saying, this is not a My Daddy Was the Zodiac Killer kind of book. This is not My Family Member Was the Zodiac Killer kind of book. This one is completely different. This book will perhaps change everything that you're going to think about how people compose Zodiac Killer theories. This book is not even that I knew the Zodiac Killer. It's that I knew the Zodiac Killer's mom, and she ratted him out. And this is the description. How I Cracked the Zodiac's Code is a chilling true crime suspense. The author shares a personal and haunting tale of friendship and detection. The author's elderly neighbor shares disturbing stories about her son's troubled past and abusive behavior, which eerily parallel the actions of the infamous Zodiac Killer. As the author listens to these shocking accounts, she begins to notice striking similarities between her sons between her neighbor's son, goodness, and the notorious serial killer. With each revelation, the author becomes increasingly convinced that she has stumbled upon a long-hidden connection. Through meticulous research and analysis, the author presents compelling evidence and insights that shed new light on the Zodiac's identity. This gripping narrative weaves together themes of obsession, trauma, and the darker aspects of human nature, culminating in a stunning revelation that will leave the readers on the edge of their seats. This is 72 pages, and the selling price is $19.99. And that actually is what's written out there. I'm not just like trying to do some plug. That was actually what's written in the description. Okay, it's called How I Cracked the Zodiac's Code. Well, why do I have to pay $19.99? Why do I have to pay $20 to read about how you cracked the Zodiac's Code? Most people put their attempts at cracking a Zodiac code online for free, for nothing. They just want to put the information out there. So you've solved the Zodiac Killer mystery. You know who the Zodiac was, yet you're charging people $20 to say how you cracked one of the codes, or maybe multiple codes. But at the same time, 72 pages, $20, you're not just going to tell us? This is not even something about, your intellectual property. This is about claiming to have solved a true crime case, one of the biggest true crime cases of the 20th century. This book is only available in paperback, 72 pages, $19.99 if anyone's interested. And by the way, I am very, very curious. I do get genuinely curious what other people have to say about the Zodiac Killer. I do Zodiac Monday for a reason. But at the same time, I also get very skeptical once someone is just charging $20 to reveal the solution to a code. I'm not even sure which Zodiac code are you talking about, the Z13, the Z32? Are you talking about the whole mystery? And anyway, this person has found a Zodiac Killer suspect who is not revealed in the description of the book, and it is the son of an elderly woman that she knew. A little bit different than my daddy was the Zodiac. I knew the Zodiac's mom, and she ratted him out. So, the thing I'm trying not to say is, I once heard this on the Lorden Arts channel. It's a true crime channel hosted by John Lorden, and he said, I'm concerned that, oh wait, no, I'm curious. I'm not concerned. And that's ultimately where I would stand on this particular book about how I cracked the Zodiac's code. In other Zodiac Killer news, a petition has been going around to call on SFPD to release all of the Zodiac Killer files, specifically in regards to the murder of Paul Stine, the taxi driver, the Zodiac Killer's final victim. And I confess that I'm a Johnny-come-lately to this story. I know that I was doing the interviews the last 3 weeks, but that is no excuse. I was aware of this one, but for the Zodiac Killer news report, I will also include a link to this down below. In the pinned comment, you can get the quick reference that is going to provide the list of topics that are covered in Zodiac Monday, and also there's a link to the Spotify page. You can download this for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and iHeartRadio, anywhere you get your podcasts, but I'll include a link to the Spotify one there for Black Box True Crime, also known as Black Box Podcast, and then there will be a link to the petition on change.org. Release all related Zodiac SFPD files. The issue. This is from Mike B., who is petitioning the San Francisco Police Department to release their files on the murder of taxi cab driver and student, and husband, and brother, and son, and friend, Paul Lee Stine. Paul Stine was one amazing person. It has been 55 years since the Zodiac Killer claimed the life of 29-year-old Paul Stine on the corner of Washington and Cherry Street in the Presidio Heights district of San Francisco. Since that day, the SFPD have guarded their files with an unrelenting grip, staunchly protecting the history of that night from public scrutiny. I ask that by signing this petition, we show the gatekeepers of this important information, and we collectively are searching in earnest for the truth. The people are here as an ally to justice. And yes, I've signed this petition, and much as Mike said here in this post, it has been 55 years. Now, there are some Zodiac Killer suspects that are alive, but most of them have passed away. And I really don't see the harm in releasing more files. to the general public. If anything, it will put more eyes on the game. And I know, I was just very, very harsh on a citizen sleuth there for a second, but it's not so much that this person is proposing a new suspect and about, how that person cracked the Zodiac's code. It's the way that they were presenting the information. Make no mistake, I think that citizen sleuthing is a good thing. And here's something else. Anybody can have a good idea. And that's why I talk about observations from all different types of individuals all across the spectrum of humanity. So, release the files. Put more eyes on the game. I would absolutely support that. And if anything, it will just give the public some more awareness. And not every citizen in America is going to read these files, right? Only the people who have a vested interest in the Zodiac Killer mystery will do so. And once again, I have a link included in the pinned comment down below. And Paul Stine was a taxi driver, but he was not the only taxi driver to have been murdered by the Zodiac Killer. Of course, there's the 1962 murder of Ray Davis, but there's also the 1970 murder of Larry Hargus. And Larry Hargus was actually featured in an article in East County magazine, which I would like to talk about now. I've mentioned Larry Hargus on the channel before, but I haven't mentioned this article called Sheriffs Seek Help to Solve Cold Case Murder of Larry Hargus, a cab driver found dead in Spring Valley in 1970. Spring Valley. The Sheriff's Homicide Detail wants your help in solving the murder of Larry Hargus. This case has gone unsolved for more than 40 years. Goodness, I guess that's more than 50 years now. On June 25th of 1970, Larry Hargus reported for work at the Yellow Cab Company. During the pre-dawn hours, Hargus radioed the cab company dispatcher to let them know that he was driving a customer from 11th and C Streets in downtown San Diego to Spring Valley. He was never heard from again. Later that day, Hargus was found shot to death in a field in the 800 block of Galapagos Street in Spring Valley. There was no sign of his cab or wallet. The abandoned cab was later found in the 1200 block of 16th Street in downtown San Diego. Investigators say robbery was a possible motive, but Hargus's murder is unsolved and no suspect has ever been identified. Now, this is one where I know that it's a possible Zodiac Killer crime, and the last time I discussed Larry Hargus on the channel, I read off the article from ZodiacCiphers.com. Richard does a great job over there, and that's a more detailed article. But immediately, just as a new glance at the case, I'm not seeing a lot of similarities between this murder and the murder of Paul Stine, the taxi driver. What I'm seeing is a closer set of similarities to the murder of Ray Davis. Ray Davis was murdered in Oceanside, California. Larry Hargus was found in San Diego, California. And Oceanside is, like, for simplicity's sake, a legal suburb of San Diego. It's in the San Diego area. Ray Davis's body was also pulled from the taxi and then dropped between two houses, again for simplicity's sake. And let's look at this again. Later that day, Hargus was found shot to death in the 800 block of Galapagos Street in Spring Valley, and the cab was later found abandoned at 1200 block of 16th Street in San Diego. So we have a San Diego parallel, Ray Davis and Larry Hargus, and also, in the Ray Davis case, the taxi cab was stolen and driven to a different location. And in this one, Larry Hargus is shot, his body's removed from the car, and the cab is driven to a different location. Lots of similarities to the murder of Ray Davis, and this actually goes to show that there are differences between the murders of Ray Davis and Paul Stine, and there are differences between the murders of Larry Hargus and Paul Stine, so those crimes just seem to look somewhat different, because Paul Stine's body was not taken from the taxi. Certain items were taken, such as his wallet and his keys and the piece of his bloody shirt, but his body was not dumped and discarded. There are way more similarities between the Hargus murder and the Davis murder than the Stine murder. That's just my take on the subject. I would love to know what you guys think about that. And right now, I would like to get to your supporter shoutouts. You can support this channel at buymeacoffee.com. buymeacoffee.com/blackboxnid88. And that allows you to make a donation or contribution to help the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out here on Zodiac Monday. And our first one comes to us from Batman66. Batman66, thank you so much for your regular and consistent support. And Batman66 also shares something with me, and that is a poster from the 1971 Zodiac film, although this one looks a little bit different. Batman66 says that this is an original Zodiac Killer theater advertisement card, never used, only 10 were known to exist. And this actually is quite different because the name of the film from 1971 was The Zodiac Killer, and this is just listed as Zodiac. But the tagline is, keep your sisters, daughters, and wives off the street, or... And then there's the Zodiac wearing his Lake Berryessa hood with a little bit more color than one would expect. And I do appreciate that all the same, though. And thank you, Batman66. And our next one comes to us from River Prawn Pottery. River Prawn Pottery is also another regular and consistent supporter. River Prawn Pottery, I also appreciate the birthday wishes that you sent to me last week. And you guys were actually very kind. Last week was my birthday that came out on a Zodiac Monday, coincidentally. And there was also a birthday wish from Raven Miyazaki. Raven, thank you so much for that. And one as well from Matt Ballou. And I really do appreciate the generosity from both of you guys for the birthday-related contributions. And then we also had one on buymeacoffee.com from Classic Chevy Cat, who had a message that was written out. And the message says, I appreciate that we are all entitled to our views, but the guest theory is difficult for me to follow. With that said, it's great that you have different guests on to express their opinions. Have a fabulous birthday, Ned. Proud to be a Nedhead, LOL. Oh, Classic Chevy Cat, thank you so much for that. And yes, my guest on last week's Zodiac Monday was C.G. Karras, author of the book The Zodiac, Murderers in History, Ciphers, and Crimes. And, you know, I do talk to people with different types of viewpoints. I talk to people who have opposing viewpoints to mine, and Zodiac Monday is about exploring different types of cases in relation to the Zodiac Killer. But once again, that was from buymeacoffee.com/blackboxned88. And I would really like to make another announcement, and that is that you guys may have noticed over the past couple weeks that I have been doing podcasts for the Thursday show in place of the live streams, True Crime Talk Radio in the morning. And the reason why was, at first, I just wanted to do a response to the book One Night in October, because I wasn't satisfied with my first book discussion on that, and I'm like, there's some things that I wanted to redo, if you will. So I did that one. Then I also realized that I had never done an individual suspect profile episode on George Caradanis as a Zodiac Killer suspect. He is one of the suspects mentioned in C.G. Karras' book, so I thought, this is also a good opportunity. And I was just looking at some of the older episodes of Black Box Online Radio, and I realized that there were certain books and suspects that I had never covered in an individual suspect profile episode. So I decided, why not use the Thursday show for some of that stuff? And I even polled you guys, and I asked you guys, what do you think about, like this subject or that subject? What would you like to hear about for next week's Thursday show? And I was really asking, would you rather hear one about Gareth Penn or Paul Doerr? And you guys voted to hear about the Zodiac suspect Paul Doerr, so I'll be releasing a podcast episode about him this Thursday. One more time, you can hit the like button and subscribe if you want to follow along with all of these true crime discussions. But really, I just want you guys to, check out some stuff if you're curious about Zodiac Killer suspects. Now, you might be thinking, haven't you talked about Paul Doerr in the past? Yes. I read his book Motor Spirit, and I did a 2-part book discussion on that. And then I read his second book, How to Find Zodiac, which is more focused on Paul Doerr, and that was just worked into different Zodiac Killer news reports. But I haven't done an individual suspect profile episode, because those are quite different than Zodiac Monday episodes like the Zodiac Killer news report, because the suspect profile episode is not a book discussion. It's not what is in the book and how do we respond to it. It's actually asking the question, do you think this person was the Zodiac Killer or not? And there's a reason why a lot of you guys really like hearing about the suspects, because you want answers to those types of questions. You want to know if this person was the Zodiac Killer or if they were not. So please check out the Thursday episode that will be done on Paul Doerr as a Zodiac suspect. And if you have any ideas for future episodes, anything about a Zodiac Killer book or suspect that I haven't covered in the past, you can put your idea in the comment section down below. And if I have already done an episode, I'll probably just send you the link. But I've already assembled a very large list of suspects and books that I haven't talked about yet individually. So let's see where this Thursday segment goes. And speaking of polling questions, I also asked you guys something on the most recent short that came out on Black Box Online Radio. I release shorts Monday through Friday here on BBOR as well as on social media, and this was on Zodiac Killer tattoos. There are several different Zodiac tattoos that have been photographed. Most of them feature the Zodiac Killer in his Lake Berryessa costume, and I was just asking you guys, what do you think about this? Yay or nay? Do you think it's acceptable or not? And we really only had one person saying yes, and everybody else seemed to say no. And there's some regular listeners here. Jerome, Mysteries with Mr. Belgique, that is, and Tori C said, oh, hell no. And sometimes I feel like a sourpuss, or just somebody who's not going along with the fun, but I have to agree. I mean, I even said that in my short episode, and I'm not trying to knock anybody who has a Zodiac Killer tattoo, because the way that I would break it down is, I completely admit that there is something that is really interesting about the Lake Berryessa costume. There is something that attracts us to that particular design. There's a reason why the Zodiac Killer wore that. It's a little bit terrifying, or it's a sharp-looking costume. However, to get a tattoo of the Zodiac Killer, we're not talking about just the symbol. Circle with a cross going through it, that's fine. That could be anything. But to get the Lake Berryessa hood tattooed on your arm or your leg or something, that sounds like glorifying a killer to me. That looks like glorifying a killer to me. But for this episode of Zodiac Monday, you guys can weigh in. Do you think that a tattoo of the Lake Berryessa hooded figure is acceptable or not? And once again, if somebody chooses to get one of those, it's not like I can stop them. It's not like I would even tell them not to do that. I would say that it's something that I don't necessarily appreciate. Again, your point of view and mine, but I would love to know what you guys think. Please put your ideas in the comments section down below. And now it is time for our award for the Comment of the Week. This is a new segment that I have started here on Black Box Online Radio, and really thank you to everybody who has been leaving comments on all of the episodes. I really do appreciate your willingness to discuss things for the discussions, and a lot of them have not been so focused on the actual Zodiac content. I've just been looking at some more personal things, but here is something that really, really is the comment of the week, because I want to talk about some Zodiac-related material. And this is from N0, and that says, I've always thought that the Zodiac's Z32 cipher was California North. I always thought that too. But the last part was an abbreviated highway. So like there was a North California highway that he was trying to point to, but couldn't figure out the name of the highway. Maybe the highway has a nickname. I'm not from there. I don't know. Well, the first part really is why I want to give you the award for the comment of the week, N0, and that is because I was talking about this in a recent episode. This is actually the Zodiac Killer news report from February 10th, and that is that no matter how many times I look at the Z32 cipher, no matter how many times I have tried to examine this and looked at other people's solutions, I cannot get over how the first two sets of symbols resemble the words California and North. And I've even thought maybe the Zodiac wanted us to reverse it, North California. And you guys know when I tried to solve it myself, I came up with North California by the Office of the Division of Vehicles, Petaluma West Division. That was my attempt at solving the cipher. But, I mean, I'm just glad that somebody else was on the same page with me, looking at how just the shapes of the symbols represent or resemble, let's use that word, resemble the words California North. So, maybe great minds think alike, or maybe the Zodiac Killer was doing something completely different. What do you guys think about this? Do you think the Zodiac actually wanted his symbols to resemble California North? And now let's get to something a little bit more speculative, and that is, so that this could be referring to a highway, couldn't figure out the name of the exact highway? Well, I mean, this is a bomb that the Zodiac is wanting to identify, and the Zodiac could easily be choosing a location close to a highway because that would be done for pure convenience. The Zodiac also made multiple threats against school children and buses, So we could be dealing with something that's in a much closer proximity to a road. There are a lot of reasons to consider that. Anyway, N0, you get the award for the comment of the week. And the next thing that I have for you here on the Zodiac Killer News Report is something, once again, from the channel Real Zodiac Killer Revealed. And this is one that is run by Adam Ivester. And in a recent video he was talking about how he disagrees with the claim that the Zodiac Killer's shoe size was a 10.5. And you can find the video on his channel, Real Zodiac Killer Revealed. He also sent me an email about this detailing his findings. And that is that he believes the Zodiac Killer was wearing a shoe that was a size 17, which suggests that the Zodiac was 6'3" or taller. His Zodiac Killer suspect is, of course, John Parr Cox, who was 6'4" tall. And he said that when they measured the Zodiac's footprint at Lake Berryessa, it was 13 inches. And someone who has a shoe that is 13 inches in length is most likely someone who would have had a size 17 shoe. And, he's just saying this stuff in the comment section on Black Box Online Radio, on his own YouTube channel, and he sent me the email about it. So I got to a certain point where I was like, let's see what this is all about. And I got on some shoe calculating websites. Yes, these things do exist. And in terms of, just going to the digital shoe store and such, yes, a shoe that is 13 inches in length is most likely going to be a size 17. That came up very easily. There's a big problem, though. And again, if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or iHeartRadio, I hope you'll come over to the YouTube presentation and check out some of the pictures, because you might be noticing something. Firstly, the metal piece of the tape measure that is used to measure this Lake Berryessa footprint is beyond the footprint. It's not even starting at 0, so it's longer than the actual print. And the second point is, in the photos that I've found of the Lake Berryessa wing walker, they don't even go to the number 13. 13 inches isn't even featured in the photograph, so that means not only is it shorter than 13 inches, it's shorter than 12 inches. Therefore, I don't think the Zodiac Killer wore a size 17 shoe. I can't even think of a single person I knew that wore size 17 shoes. Size 15, sure, my roommate in college, he talked about it all the time. The true story. But size 17, no. So clearly, this is not a 13-inch shoe print. This is not a size 17 shoe. And it seems like most likely that this was indeed a 10.5. And I really, really don't care for this part of the discussion. A second reason I'm talking about this is, I told you guys last week, I mentioned Real Zodiac Killer Revealed a lot on Black Box Online Radio solely because that channel produces regular Zodiac content. But I think I've finally reached a point where I just have to say, enough is enough. It's just not being honest at this point if you're going to say that the Zodiac was wearing size 17 shoes at Lake Berryessa when it appears that the evidence is suggesting things to the contrary. But that's where I'm going to leave it for now. What do you think? And I would like to thank you guys so much for listening to Zodiac Monday. And you guys know where to write the show, blackboxonlineradio@AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook name is Ned DeHaan. There is also a page for Black Box Online Radio on Facebook as well. And I release shorts Monday through Friday on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and here on YouTube. On TikTok and Instagram, my name is blackboxned88, and I will see you over there. And I'll be with you guys tomorrow for True Crime Talk Radio in the morning, and also Wednesday for Jack the Ripper, and Friday about D.B. Cooper. And please, feel free to tune in for the bonus episode that will be coming out on Thursday, talking about the Zodiac Killer suspect, Paul Doer. That's all for me. Goodbye.